The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the 5th day of the 7-day session in April 2023 at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. In Buddhist history, there were 4 notable, especially notable, I think, lay people, although there were millions of lay people who had experienced deep awakening. But the 4 that reach us in history begin during the Buddhist time, actually, with Vimalakirti, who was so awakened that when the Buddha asked all his major disciples to go and visit Vimalakirti because he was ill, they all said, oops, no, sorry. When I was doing thus and so, he came and asked me about this, and I responded, but he said, no, it's really this way, or no, that's not quite there yet. And so I really don't want to go and see him again. Right now, let me get my practice deeper, and then I'll be willing to do it. And so one by one, each one of the senior disciples begged out, until finally there was no one left but Manjushri, who's known as the Bodhisattva of wisdom, transcendental wisdom, the most enlightened of all other than the Buddha. And so Manjushri was called upon to go and have a dialogue with Vimalakirti. And of course, everybody else crowded into this tiny little room, including something like 86,000 bodhisattvas and countless other beings, in a tiny little room that is so small, it wouldn't barely fit into our office. It was a 1-cot room. And so this was remarkable. But we won't go into that. That's a whole other teisho. In fact, it's a whole other series of teishos, as Vimalakirti and Manjushri do a kind of a Dharma duel. The next person, and I'm not sure about the order, but the next person was Prajnatara, who was the teacher of the Buddha. And she was such a deeply awakened, renowned lay woman, that the village that she lived in still celebrates her to this day. This is a little known fact. Then, I'm not sure who came first, but there were Layman Pang, who was obviously a layman. All of these people were unordained. And also Fudaishi. Fudaishi was known for wearing a Buddhist robe, Confucian shoes, which looked like boats, and a Taoist hat. He was covering all the bases. And that's probably not what he intended, but he was most likely trying to express the fact that there's a universal truth that is true regardless of whatever the dogma is in a given religion. So Layman Pang, Pang Yun, as he's known, obviously had some questioning going on. He was born during the Tang dynasty. I think it was 1740, and died at the age of 68 in the next century, and was married and had a wife and a son. And his wife, and his daughter were all known as highly awakened individuals. And at a certain point, he and his daughter went off, and his wife and his son went off and lived separate lives. Before that, he's known as the person who, once he had significantly deep awakening experiences, and I say multiple experiences because he had multiple experiences, which I hope is in store for every one of you here. And when that happened, and he and his wife and his daughter, and to a certain degree his son also, had awakening experiences, and they agreed they put all of their belongings in a boat, went out to the middle of a lake and sunk them, letting go of everything they owned. And from then on, they lived weaving baskets and selling them for whatever food they could get. A very, very simple life. Layman Pang did not actually start Buddhism, or I should say he did not meet a teacher until he was 45 years old. But by that time, he had already, no doubt, done a great deal of questioning. Of course, life was much simpler then, and he didn't have the interruption of the flashing screens that we have these days, all the entertainment that we have these days. It reminds me a little bit of living in Burma. Rangoon was a little bit more advanced in that there were actually, I think there were movie theaters in Rangoon, although I don't remember any of them. And there was a Russian-built hotel that actually had a swimming pool that actually functioned as a swimming pool and not as a collection of water. And then we moved to Mandalay. We were assigned to Mandalay, where it was far more simple. There were only 14 wheeled motorized vehicles in that city of 300,000 people. People either walked or they rode bicycles. And on occasion, they would ride one of the, what they called pony carts. There were horse-drawn, two-person seated beside the driver, horse carts. And in fact, somebody at some point had made a comment, some foreign dignitary had made a comment about all the horse poop in the streets. And so from then on, the horses had this wide cloth strung behind their behind to catch whatever came out. This is a source of much amusement by many people. And there were actually, I think, a couple of buses that ran along the main road, which was so wide and so void of traffic that once every several hours something would move by, unless it was a bicycle. And even then, life was much slower. The night market, which we went to on the nights it was open, which only was a couple of nights a week, we went to see what the local folks had created out of our discarded Coke cans. That was about the only metal that they had to do anything with, and they made various different interesting things out of them, dustpans and so on and so forth. And basically, the sidewalks rolled up at 8 o'clock at night. It was very close to the equator, and so when Rudyard Kipling wrote, "The sun comes up like thunder," he was correct about that part, but not about from China across the bay, because Mandalay is quite inland, and there's no bay anywhere near, and there's actually land access to China. But all of a sudden, it goes from pitch black dark to bright sun. And then the reverse happens at night. Very, very simple life. And it was probably even less simple, or I should say more simple, for Layman Pang and his family. So at 45, he discovers a teacher, a Zen teacher. And here's the information about that. He began studying under Shichuan, who actually is in our lineage, by the way. And he soon attained a breakthrough, recognized by his teacher. That was in the year 785. So he'd only had 1 year of practice, which is remarkable. But that attests to the fact that he had a great deal of curiosity, questioning, and understood that it had to be beyond language. So when he met Zen Master Shuto, he asked him, who is the one who's not a companion to the 10,000 dharmas? Who is the one who is not a companion to the 10,000 dharmas? In other words, phenomena. Who is one who is not part of phenomena? And Shuto immediately covered his mouth, at which point Layman Pang had his first awakening. And then one day, Shuto asked, what have you been doing each day since we last saw each other? And Layman Pang wrote this very famous poem, or spoke this very famous poem. My daily activities are not unusual. I'm naturally in harmony with them, grasping nothing, pushing nothing away. In every place, there is no hindrance, no conflict. Who assigns the ranks of vermilion and purple? Those are the royal status symbols. The hills and mountains, last speck of dust is exhausted. My supernatural powers and marvelous activity, drawing water and carrying firewood. So my daily activities are not unusual. This is one of the things that people mistake about an awakened mind. When you awaken, you realize, well, of course it's just like this, but you have reached a point where you have seen through enough attachment to self-image that you recognize at least some level of the truth. And then, of course, you need to keep going. So then your activities in life are the same, but more freely entered into, more freely let go of. I'm naturally in harmony with them, grasping nothing, pushing nothing away. And if you remember when Mitra-roshi had a deep awakening experience, he realized all he had to do was receive. And that meant receive with open arms, whatever came to him, without trying to push it away, without trying to grab hold of it if it began to disappear. Simply in harmony with the flow and ebb of life. It is quite ordinary, and yet, at the same time, quite extraordinary. We are caught in a level of delusion, fueled by ideas about ourselves, fueled by conditioning that create those ideas about ourselves. And so we try to escape from them, from the pain that we may have experienced. And as part of that, we develop a core belief about ourselves, which is false, but we don't realize that. And it is that core belief that drives our behavior, drives our attitudes, drives our experiences, our likes, our dislikes, all of it. Joko Beck, who is a contemporary teacher, although she's died, and I can't remember when she died, it was not that long ago, and had originally been in a very abusive marriage. She had 4 children, and finally she left her husband. And at the time, she was working as a secretary in a university. I don't remember what university. And eventually went into Zen practice, not eventually, just quite soon after that, or during that, went into Zen practice, and gradually ended up becoming a very well-known Zen teacher. She's got a number of books out that she herself wrote, Zen in Everyday Life, or was it Everyday Zen? At any rate, All you have to do is Google Joko Beck and you'll find the titles. And that was, I think, her first one. The second one, I don't recall the title of, but each of these were really insightful books in terms of Zen practice, and quite insightful in terms of how Zen practice was taught back in that era when those books came out. I think Everyday Zen is what that first one was called. Very practical and with great insight into simple everyday life and how we make our own reality. And eventually she became a Zen teacher, as I said, and had a Sangha and has successors, as a matter of fact, although two of them did not behave in the way she felt a truly enlightened Zen person should behave. And so she took them off her list of successors. For a good reason, I should say. And here, let's share what she has said. This is from a book of her talks that was published after she died, and quite recently by one of her daughters. It's called Ordinary Wonder, Zen Life and Practice. And this is from the chapter Cutting Off Escape. And you've heard in previous teishos about the wisdom of no escape. That when we are forced to face our stuff, then we have an option to work with it, process it, letting it go. And in the process, to become more free from it. So she says this: so much of our practice is noticing what we do. Attention, aware. Extending that out breath, we feel the experience of breathing out for a long, 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 long way. And it drops away things that we would distract ourselves from if we're doing that practice properly. Thoughts, ideas, escape. And that is the point. Because when we don't escape, when we walk right into the moment as it really appears to be, then we are much closer to living in the true reality. The rest of the time, we're caught in a dream of who we are and what things are about. We use thought to escape. We use ideas to escape. We use pain to escape. We use all kinds of things to escape. And yet, it's not real escape. It's just reinforcing where we're caught. And so, noticing that we have a lot of thoughts, not necessarily what they are or anything, because they'll vary. Some of them will just be random thoughts. Some of them will be things we'd like to do, or who we think we are, or what we want to do at some point. It's classic, and I kind of hesitate to bring this up as we get closer to the end of Sesshin, to start thinking about what you're going to do at the end of Sesshin. And that is a real trap. That's a significant trap. It takes you far, far away from your practice, sadly, because there's still more days in which you can truly deepen, because already you've worked on your practice for 5 days. We're into the middle, more than the middle of the 5th day. And it took some effort, it took some energy, it took some focus to do that. So don't waste it. Don't waste it. Don't sell yourself short. You won't notice it all because some of it we don't yet have access to it. But we'll notice something. And we notice the string of thoughts that continue to arise when we sit. Not all our thoughts spring from our core belief, or its anxious or its anxious attendant, our busy strategies. Sometimes we're just noticing a car going by and thinking about that. But usually, even if we are just thinking about what to have for dinner, our thoughts are flowing out of the core belief. When we've labeled and noticed certain thoughts repeating hundreds of times, those strings of thoughts that were designed to fly or change, to fix or change the fact of our experience, are no longer so interesting. So that's the thing. When we begin to pay enough attention, we'll begin to realize there's a lot of yada, 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 yada. Repeat yada, yada, yada. Repeat yada, yada, yada. Going on almost as a bulwark against feeling, against seeing, against experiencing, against noticing what's beneath. So when we start by noticing how much we think and how nonsensical it is in terms of whether it's even relevant today or in this moment, that's a big start. We notice, and then we begin to realize, what am I covering up? What's under this? Is there a level of anxiety? And we tune in to our body. This is the most important thing. Tuning into our body. When we choose to drop out of those thoughts, we end up getting closer to that core belief about ourselves. Are we worthy? Are we good enough? Are we failing? Are we going to fail if we don't do whatever we're anxious about? And the anxiety can continue onward in the background, inhabiting every thought, inhabiting everything you think to do, and inhabiting every moment, background noise. Turn and experience that anxiety over and over and over again. The energy of it. The story is not so significant. Understanding the story can help to a certain degree, but not, it won't free you from that background belief, which is formed as a result of the story. Keep on going. Down and down and down within. And each moment you will encounter maybe nothing, maybe something critical, which will come in the form of a sensation in your body, an urge to flee, an urge to cry out, an urge to shut down. All of these things are important to notice and tune into, because they're ways that you have kept yourself from coming to awakening. Let's go back to Layman Pang's poem again. My daily activities are not unusual. I'm naturally in harmony with them, grasping nothing, pushing nothing away. In every place, there's no hindrance, no conflict. Who assigned the ranks of vermilion and purple? Traditionally, purple being such a rare dye, people who had purple robes were of the highest level of importance in Buddhism and in other places as well. Vermilion was next. As someone in the prison camp in Japan during the Second World War. There were a number of Americans and Britishers in that camp because they were foreigners. And one of them, when it became very clear that the war was getting close to its end, and they were frightened that the guards would just massacre them all, was concerned about that and mentioned it, the anxiety coming up about that. And the person that responded said, in 100 years, what will it matter? In 100 years, what will it matter? But we can work on our anxiety now, including any anxiety around dying or death. The hills and mountains, last speck of dust, extinguished. In other words, when he sees clearly. My supernatural powers and marvelous activity, drawing water and carrying firewood. In other words, whatever he does, because he's so present, is simply a sense of miraculous activity. And that is what happens when we have an awakening experience, and then another one, and then another one, and keep on deepening. Eventually we will experience a very deep level when everything we do will be absolutely amazing from our perspective, not from an ego trip, but the phenomenal experience of it will be amazing. It will be a miracle to experience the sky so blue as it is here in New Mexico. The peace so quiet as it is here in New Mexico. Or walking down the sidewalks in New York City, the amazing play of color and form as we walk down the sidewalk. The amazing sounds we hear. There is no limit. We don't need to be in a place of quiet and peace when we have achieved that mind state, or I should say not achieved, it's an opening. It's there. It's just covered up by our attempts to escape whatever we're trying to escape from. And those escape mechanisms are ways to compensate for what we have experienced when we were younger, and we can see through them and become free of them through attention, awareness. Sometimes therapy can help, and presence. Truly being present makes a big difference. So, Layman Pang again. So he had that encounter with Shuto when Shuto clapped his hand over his mouth, over Layman Pang's mouth. What did he mean by that? What was he trying to say to Layman Pang? Layman Pang has this deep question. Is there anybody else? Is there really somebody who's there in the middle of the Dharmas? And how can I get that monkey off my back? When I went to my first sesshin, a 4-day sesshin in Rochester, hoping only to survive the physical schedule, I did survive it. And it was wretched because I was caught in a lot of places back then. And the next morning, I found myself sitting for 2 hours without realizing I had sat for 2 hours without moving. During that time, I realized all I had to do was get that monkey off my back. All I had to do was let go the self-talk, the self-image, the ideas about who I thought I was, and see the depth of who I really was. And that is what we're all called upon to do in Zen practice, and what we can do in Zen practice. The Susalkan, the extended out-breath, is an incredible tool that works very fast in that direction if we are willing to employ it appropriately and persist. It will make a big difference. You can come all the way to awakening through that practice if you persist long enough, with a sense of openness to possibility, is the best way I can put it. Is sometimes called beginner's mind or only don't know, but there's more to it than that. It's an open curiosity. It's the fascination of a child, a very small child. I remember my oldest son, when he was able to walk, which was rather early, and so I was taking him for walks, and I just let him go, and he was exploring everything, which is wonderful, and that's what people should allow their children to do. Of course, keep an eye out that they're not doing something like eating poison beans or something like that, but to allow a child ultimate freedom is a great treasure. And I remember my first great-grandson, the same thing, taking him for a walk, and he was just really interested in exploring things. That's how children get to understand their physical universe. And if they're not prevented from doing that, they allow themselves, they naturally allow themselves to open to the full nuances of the environment to great benefit. They're truly present, these little kids. They haven't yet learned to cover things up with thought. They haven't yet learned to see themselves as somebody. They're quite free. To watch that and to enjoy it and to allow it is really, really important for the future of humanity, really. So Layman Pang continues. So next he encountered Matsu, who is also known in Japanese as Baso Doitsu. And he asked him the same question. Who is the one who's not a companion to the 10,000 dharmas? Matsu said, when you swallow up all the water in the West River in one gulp, I'll tell you. And when he heard that, Layman Pang finally realized the mystery. He then stayed and practiced under Matsu. And then he started going around. He became known as a highly enlightened layperson. He went to a reading of the Diamond Sutra. And when the speaker reached the phrase, no self, no other, Layman Pang called out, Speaker, if there's no self and no other, then who's lecturing and who's listening to it? And the speaker, who obviously did not understand deeply the meaning of the Diamond Sutra, was dumbstruck. Layman Pang said, I'm just a common person, but I'll offer you my crude understanding. The speaker said, what is the layman's idea? It's not an idea, it's an understanding. Pang answered with this verse, no self, no other. Then how could there be intimate and estrangement? I advise you to cease all your lecturing. They can't compare with the direct seeing of truth. The diamond wisdom nature erases even a speck of dust. Thus have I heard, and thus I believe, are but so many words. And that said, it was the sixth patriarch to be who, through a phrase in the Diamond Sutra, arouse the mind without it abiding anywhere, came to awakening. That's what Layman Pang had done. And if you understand this deeply enough, you will, with one gulp, be able to swallow the entire ocean. How? I leave you with that question. I will stop now and recite the 4 vows.